Good planning relies on good data, and a new report from the Neptis Foundation says our knowledge of population growth in the Greater Golden Horseshoe is out of tune with reality. So, joining us now for a look at that and what it might mean for Ontario's current review of the greenbelt and the Places to Grow growth plan, here are Jan De Silva. She's President and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, Marcy Birchfield, Executive Director of the Neptis Foundation, and Pamela Blais, Planning Consultant at Metropole Consultants and author of the Neptis Foundation's report, Planning for Prosperity, which I happen to have on the table here. What a coincidence. Okay. Let's just, so everybody knows, Sheldon, why don't we bring this map up? This is the part of the province that we're talking about right now. We're talking about 110 municipal jurisdictions. This is, as you might imagine, some of the most populated part of Ontario. A quarter of Ontario's population lives in just this swath of land that goes around the western end of Lake Ontario. So, Marcy, let's get into this. What was the mission of the growth plan to begin with?
So really it was the province's attempt at being the de facto regional planner in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Prior to that, municipalities, some municipalities in the region planned in isolation of one another. There was really no regional strategy for land use in this region.
Which we need, I guess.
Which we definitely need, considering how fast we're growing. And essentially, the objective of the growth plan was to curb sprawl, because sprawl is very expensive to service. It's also very, very difficult to get transit into sort of these low-density segregated areas. And so the objective of the growth plan is really to create a compact urban form, because it's easy to service, it's cheaper to service, and it's also much more efficient.
Okay, in which case, Pamela, how did they decide we're going to build here, we're going to intensify here, we're not going to build here, we're going to leave this alone?
Mm-hmm. So what the growth plan has as its main feature is these 25 urban growth centers. And the idea of these, this nodal urban structure for the whole region has been around for quite some time, I would say decades. Back in 1992, the Office of the Greater Toronto Area, which was the provincial office, looked into different options for how we might structure the region. And it decided at that point that this nodal idea of having centers across the whole region was the best way to go. And that makes sense really when you consider an expanding urban region, it gets so big that you need to have more localized centers that act as civic centers or local business centers. So some of those were old, for example, older downtowns of existing towns, for example, Hamilton downtown, Oshawa downtown, Brampton downtown. And some of them were to be new centers planned for the more suburban areas that were around the city of Toronto. So a new center for Mississauga that would be born out of a shopping mall, essentially, and a new one for Markham that would be born straight out of Greenfields. So it was determined as being the best approach to implement those ideas about effective, compact, efficient urban form.
Jan, let me get your take from a business person's point of view on whether the Toronto Region Board of Trade is essentially on side with the idea of yes to intensification here, no to leaving it alone in other places.
No, absolutely. I think the need for intensification speaks back to what we were talking about earlier. It enables us to get transit and other forms of services in place much easier if there's more densification.
Let's get a little deeper into some of the numbers then here. This again is from the report Pamela did, which we mentioned right off the top of the program. Between the years 2001 and 2011, employment in downtown Toronto grew by more than 48,000 jobs. Now, the area around Pearson Airport added more than 22,000 jobs, becoming the second largest concentration of employment in Canada. However, some smaller city centres dropped. Brampton, as you can see, almost off 4,000. Hamilton, almost off by 800. Guelph, also almost off by 800. So let's figure this out, Pamela. What industries added job? Where did we lose jobs?
Right. So what's driving this change is that the GGH, Greater Golden Horseshoe economy, is really in the middle of an ongoing economic restructuring and a transition, a long-term transition to a knowledge-intensive economy. And so the kinds of things that are growing are those knowledge-intensive activities and sectors. So when you look at it in terms of employment, it's things like computer programmers, scientists, engineers, technicians, teachers, those skilled and high-skilled kinds of activities. And what's not growing, and in fact in many cases where there's been job loss, is in the more routine kinds of activities. And that's across all sectors, although mainly focused in manufacturing.
Is cars, building cars, is that considered routine oriented?
Some parts of it, yes. So in fact, we've lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs in the Greater Golden Horseshoe alone since 2001. A lot of those jobs were routine, but we're also losing jobs in other areas like back office uses, clerical. Those are the kinds of things that are susceptible to technological change, so replacing employment. So that's the backdrop to those numbers.
Okay, Marcy, let me ask you about the second thing on that list, which was the Mississauga Pearson Airport area, which is up a lot. Is that area included in the growth plan?
No, it's glaringly absent from the growth
But
plan.
it's growing.
But it's growing, and I mean that's really what struck me when we mapped and analyzed the core employment data that is part of Pamela's report. Just the sheer number of jobs that are in that area. The resiliency in some of the areas of the airport center, the larger airport center. I mean, the number of jobs compares to the Central Business District of Vancouver and the Central Business District of Montreal. That's a lot of jobs in a relatively concentrated area.
So we need that area in the growth plan because why? What will make a difference?
Because that area crosses multiple jurisdictions, multiple municipal jurisdictions. And so the goal of the growth plan, or the objective of the growth plan, is to get a coherent regional strategy. And so it's very important that an area like that really crosses municipal boundaries for coordination purposes of transit, reurbanization, that sort of thing, it needs to be in the growth plan.
Jan, I've got to ask you, because I suspect if you're watching us right now in Hamilton or in Guelph or in Brampton, and you are concerned about the job losses happening in your downtowns, which are not massive, but, concerning, I guess. Can you help us understand why those city centers are suffering job losses? What's going on?
Yeah, I would say that, quite frankly, we're seeing certain clusters, certain sectors of competitiveness developing in certain areas. So, for example, we've seen some growth in Mississauga and in Toronto core from the health sciences cluster. I think over time, there are opportunities to bring in other parts of the region who have expertise or who can develop expertise that'll help us develop jobs. But more specifically, I think something else that's overlaying all of this is with the growth that we're having in the region, there's a whole other level of job creation that's happening around the build out of infrastructure to support all this growth. And we've got something we're paying attention to greatly is that there's a shortage of trades to do the actual build. There's a shortage of transit and infrastructure engineers to work on those projects. So there's a huge job creation opportunity that's not being addressed as part of the need to get infrastructure built.
But there seems to be, Marcy, a greater appetite these days for moving businesses to sort of suburban industrial parks as opposed to having them go downtown, which is where they might have been built 100 years ago, 50 years ago. Why is that happening?
Well, I think it's been happening for a while, actually. Certainly since the 90s, you've seen the growth of business parks all over, city regions across the world, particularly North American city regions. There's a number of reasons that I think Pamela can actually speak to more so than I could, but part of it is there's financial incentives to go to some of these places that compared to downtown. And sometimes there's planning incentives, perverse planning incentives.
To go to the burbs.
That's right, that
Okay.
Pamela wrote the book on.
You want to follow up on that?
Well, I actually think in terms of the geography of restructuring, again, I think that's really what's the main thing here. And we have seen a huge number of jobs being located newly in downtown Toronto. So over 45,000, and a lot of that is since 2006. So, and that has to do, again, with the growing sectors are knowledge-intensive kinds of activities. They benefit from concentrating. So it's things like advertising, it's business services, it's finance, it's media, all of those things.
All that the creative young types are into.
Yes, and a lot of corporate head office kinds of uses as well. And we've seen evidence recently, it's anecdotal at this point, even firms like Apple, for example, moving from suburban locations to downtown. And I think a big part of that has got to do with transit, because in the suburban areas, those firms that are knowledge intensive, they really need to draw on a wide area to get the skilled people that they need. So in the absence of a regional high order transit network, they have to locate where they can get their workers can get to their jobs by car.
Right.
There's not really any alternative. So that means highway access, that means places where there's a lot of parking. So until the transit is actually in place in those locations, I think we're still faced with that.
But I think the point you made, Steve, is also true, that the knowledge workers, there is an appeal to being in downtown Toronto, and that's really driven both the condominium development as well as the migration of jobs back into the city.
Globalization seems to have an impact on absolutely every aspect of our lives, so I'm assuming it's got some role to play in all of this. Yes, Jen?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, the global economy today is about major metro regions competing against each other. It's no longer country to country. So we have to compete against other major metro jurisdictions for the talent that we need and the investment that we need to continue to have economic growth. So things that we're looking at with the Planning for Prosperity report is really giving us the data we need to say if there's a lot of infrastructure funding available, where do we put those dollars to have the best impact for the region as a whole, rather than trying to look at it by piecemeal projects, municipality by municipality.
Can you determine, we're sitting in Ontario's capital city right now, can you determine which other quote-unquote city-states, either on this continent or around the world, we consider to be our prime competition?
Well, as it pertains to trade, and that's a big area of focus for the Board of Trade, I would say the city of Chicago is somebody that we look at very, very closely. They're outperforming us in trade over the past decade. If I give an example of Ontario trade with China, we were doing about $1.2 billion a decade ago. They were doing $900 million. We're now at $2.2 billion. They're at $5.7 billion. And 3 of their top 5 trade sectors we're stronger in than they are. So
why is this happening?
Well, a lot of it has to do with how we're positioning our businesses to take advantage of trade opportunities. Historically, our companies have been more comfortable looking at the U.S. rather than other jurisdictions or growth markets like China. The other thing is Chicago has done a tremendous job of developing its international hub transportation network with the airports, with the train connectivity, and other ways of moving goods very efficiently and people very efficiently through the city.
Are we not getting more competitive on that? I mean, we just opened a $500 million Union Pearson Express to get business people easily from the airport to downtown.
Yes, but I think I think when it comes to transit planning, the one thing that we always need to keep in mind is that transit planning is the flip side of transit planning is land use planning. And if you don't get the land use planning right, the transit won't necessarily work. And that's what we're seeing in some of these suburban areas, particularly in the airport area. There is much more connectivity within this. I'm actually originally from Chicago.
Oh, really?
I am, and I have seen the way the airport area has grown there, and part of it actually is a reurbanization strategy, which brings more than just employment in, but also employment in different sectors, brings retail in. There is much more to planning in that larger airport area. But one of our challenges is that that area is not recognized in the growth plan, which is what our regional strategy is based on.
So what do we need to have happen in order to exploit this?
Well, I think we have an opportunity as part of this 10-year review of our growth plan. We're moving into right now the 10-year review of the Big Move, which is our regional transit plan. And maybe in the mix of all of that, we might consider a regional economic development plan that would be in tandem with these other 2 plans. And so it's something that certainly other places like London in the UK, they certainly have these different plans that speak to each other in a much more coherent way than our current plans do.
Pamela, I hear this Ontario government say it's about to spend $130 billion over the next decade getting the transit in place that should theoretically make us more competitive and just a nicer place to live. How would you characterize that opportunity?
I think it's absolutely essential, and what really needs to happen is that transit investment has to really be considered a strategic investment. So strategic from the point of view of where is it going to be placed in the urban region to make sure we hit really not only the places where a lot of the jobs are and a lot of the trips are being generated. So the area around the airport, again, that's 300,000 jobs in that area. That area, along with the other 2 sort of mega zones that we identified, suburban mega zones, those generate up to 1 million trips a day, auto trips a day, just those 3 areas. So it's a matter of really targeting those key areas that are the engines of congestion.
So there's $1 billion LRT going up the spine of Mississauga. Is that
not up to Brampton anymore?
Not to Brampton, right? Well, only as far as right.
Yes. So
is that
I
helpful
would
to
say that might have some marginal utility, but that's you're looking at a kind of a mouse, and the big elephant that's right beside that is the 300,000 jobs in the airport megazone that are 95% serviced by auto. So I think we tend not to look at that because it's not in our plans, and we really need, if we really want to make some inroads into the congestion issue, we really need to look at those structural issues and where are the major areas generating those automobile trips.
Okay, so this is, all right, you wanted to say it?
I wanted to say, I would fully agree. I think we need to focus more attention on the airport area itself. It's such an important international hub tool for us at the moment, and we're really underinvesting in it. We're not treating it like a strategic asset. If we can't get better transit connectivity around the airport, it's really going to inhibit the number of international travelers that are choosing to use Toronto as a connecting point.
Are they charging too much for the UP Express?
No, UP Express is fine. We just need to add some more services to it to make it more consumer friendly. And by that I mean it's not just taking you and your bag. You should be able to check in your bag in advance, go about your day downtown Toronto, and just get on your flight at the end of the day and your bag's already taken care of. There's other markets, other cities in the world that are able to operate more services around things like UP Express that makes it easier for a business traveler to do business and not have to worry about lugging a suitcase around the city.
So I hear you saying $130 billion over the next decade for public transit is good. I also hear you saying it might not be in the right place. So for example, nothing up in the northwest part of Mississauga where the airport is, where you need it. Scarborough Subway, good idea, bad idea? What?
Oh, I don't want to wade into those waters.
Oh, wade in, why not? $4 billion for a 3-stop subway to Scarborough, Ontario.
Well, I think we'll become more successful at transit planning if we approach it in a more comprehensive way. If we approach it with the facts
You're trying
forward,
so hard to be so diplomatic here.
the facts forward, and less as political contributions to places. But that doesn't mean that we don't need more transit in the Scarborough area. We certainly do. But one of the things that we should be looking at is, where do people in Scarborough work? Do they work mainly downtown Toronto? Do they work in York Region? Do they work in Scarborough itself?
Do we know the answer to that?
Some have looked into this. There's certainly data out there, and I can tell you that there's a lot of people who travel north of Scarborough for their employment into the York region, and perhaps that's where the concentration should be in terms of these cross-border transit issues.
All right, I'm going to let you get away with that because I know you're not in politics. So here we go. Okay, Pamela. The mayor of Toronto got elected, I think, in large measure because he promised something called Smart Track, where he was going to improve the public transit of the capital city of the province in 7 years, not 20 for a subway, but in 7 years by using a lot of existing resources and so on. What would you like to see happen with that?
Well, what I would like to see is really a regional perspective, because it's a regional labor market. People don't necessarily, just live and work in the city of Toronto. There are these other major areas that we've identified in our report that need to be serviced. And so I think we really need to take that regional perspective.
Does that mean no to Smart Track in your view?
It doesn't mean no. It means it could work if it actually does that. So if we were able to, for example, link it up to the airport area or to the Markham City Centre in a way that really provided service, not just to that little dot that's in the center of those areas, but to the entire 300,000 people that work around the airport, for example, then it might have some function. But to plan it just in terms of the City of Toronto, I think it would be not really realizing the full potential of it.
You're the Toronto Region
We're
Board
the
of
Toronto
Trade.
Region Board of Trade, but let me just say there's two different strategies here. I fully support what we're saying in the Planning for Prosperity report, which is we've got to have a regional master plan. We're growing too quickly as a region not to have that to take full advantage of our opportunities. But as it pertains to Smart Track, the reality is City of Toronto has a huge poverty issue. And until we can get transit to connect people to jobs, we're not going to have any quick fix solutions. And so things like Smart Track, while they may not be as additive to the regional growth strategy, they are still very, very necessary for making sure that everyone's got an opportunity for prosperity.
Have you weighed in on the advisability of building a three-stop, $4 billion subway in Scarborough, Ontario?
I was hoping that question wouldn't come here.
And here it is.
Here it is. But you know what, Steve? I'm going to dodge it by saying this. I think the bigger problem than whether Scarborough has a business case to support it is the reality that we've got a history of just flip-flopping on projects. And at the end of the day, let's just say a decision's been made and get on with it. Because if we keep reopening it, nothing's going to get delivered for Scarborough. And there's very compelling reasons to get that community better integrated. Whether the directional pieces are the right ones or not, I think you're making some good points. But the reality is we just need to get on with things rather than keep revisiting decisions that have been made.
So, and I'm not saying this, but I'm hearing others say,
okay.
So if it's a stupid decision, it may be stupid, but we've made it and let's move on.
I'm not saying it's a stupid decision. What I'm saying is it's a decision that's been made and let's move on. I mean, we've been deputing on infrastructure that's at the end of its useful life, like Gardner East, and we've just got to get on with it or it's going to crumble at our feet and we're not going to have options for addressing it. So.
Okay. How are we doing on time here? We're okay? Like a few minutes to go? Okay. So going forward, what planning changes would you like to see as a result of all of this study that's been done?
So going forward, there's two real issues that I think need to be addressed. One is we need to get the right evidence base forward and continually develop it to make the right decisions when it comes to transit, land use planning, and economic development.
Decisions based on evidence?
Well, but the
Sounds
problem,
very controversial.
But the problem is, it's not inexpensive to create these plans and implement them. And so, if you're creating these plans and implementing them, we should probably understand whether they work or not. And there should be some program in place that allows us to do that. Now, as I mentioned, the 10-year review of the growth plan and the land use review plans, David Crombie chaired a panel looking at the review of these land use plans and suggested in two of his recommendations that both we should have a coordinating body at the provincial scale so that ministries who are responsible for land use planning coordinate information for one thing, and then there should be an oversight forum that includes both provincial, municipal, and then civic society actors such as the Neptis Foundation, the development industry, others, the Board of Trade, that essentially is part of a monitoring and reporting of whether these plans are working.
That sounds very process-oriented, so make sure I just understand.
Process, yes.
But no, you got to have process in place or things fall apart. But in our last few seconds here, just tell us, if we did that, why would that make our lives better?
Well, that's just one thing we need to do. We need to get good information, and so we know whether our plans are successful or not. But also, governance matters. Governance matters probably more so than the former, in the sense that we have a regional plan, we have a regional transportation plan, but we need to have political legitimacy and buy-in to these plans. And so the province has a role, the municipalities has a role, and what's absent right now is some kind of formal body to convene these people, to debate these ideas, to realize a regional vision that is agreeable to everybody and move forward it and champion it as a whole, as opposed to just the heavy hand of the province and this battle between the local autonomy of the municipalities. I mean, that's a big struggle here.
Gotcha. That's our time, everybody. Thanks so much for coming into TVO tonight. Can we thank Pamela Blais, planning consultant with Metropole Consultants, and she authored this report, Planning for Prosperity. Marcy Birchfield, Executive Director of the Neptis Foundation. Jan De Silva, President, CEO, Toronto Region Board of Trade. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.